Zhou Daren rolled around in the dark room, and the bed was covered in a group, as if pulled by invisible claws. His face twisted in the faint moonlight, and his sweat slid down his head, accompanied by the unwilling gurgling sound deep in his stomach. He held the quilt on the bed tightly, tried to suppress the pain in his arms, but he only changed into a low moan and returned to the empty room. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the blue light on the mobile phone screen flashed in the dark, reminding the helplessness of this inexperienced young man. He gritted his teeth and got up from the bed, his steps shaking, like a drunk, and fumbled in the narrow corridor. On the way, he knocked over the beer can on the bed. The crisp sound of the jingling was particularly harsh in the silence, and the smell of beer spread in the air, enhancing the wolf wandering in the city. He lowered his curse and said, "You're going to die." His language was filled with fatigue and frustration, and sweat beads fell on the cold floor. The bathroom door squeaked, and he stumbled in and sat on the bucket against the wall. The dim light cast shadows, his face twisted into a group, his eyebrows are tightly locked, and his teeth are chewing. The background was the never-ending ticking sound of the water pipe, as if laughing at his helplessness. He took a deep breath and pushed hard, and a burst of explosive sound burst out, accompanied by the splash of water. At that moment, a strange flash of light came into the eyes, and a piece of stuff fell into the bucket, with a metal-like light on the surface. Zhou Daren was stunned. His eyes were slight, his pupils were slightly closed, and he lowered his waist to look closer. The thing swayed in the water of the horse bucket, emitting a sense of ice-cold metal. His fingers couldn't help but stretched over. The moment he touched, a strange fragrance penetrated into his nose, like a mixture of metal and soil, arousing a spark of ambition in his heart. His breathing became rapid and his chest was volatile. "Wow, is this gold?" he said to himself, his voice filled with trembling with excitement. "God, Zhou Daren, are finally about to turn over. As long as you sell this piece, you can buy a car and live without any money." He raised his eyes and showed a swaying smile at the lens, and his mouth was sniffing, unable to hide his self-righteous pride. Who said I was a waste of money? This is my secret weapon, which will make those banks dumbfounded." As soon as the voice fell, he hurriedly grabbed the golden flash object and wrapped it around with a paper towel around his hand. The action was as clumsy as a thief. On the way, he accidentally hit the door frame. The wooden head sounded and echoed in the bathroom. He jogged all the way back to the room, stuffing the package into the slug. The buzzing sound of the fan was like the background music, accompanied by his breathing. His heart beats like a drum. He imagines his future life, his money are rampant, ignoring the hidden anxiety. Time passed, and 4 hours later, a rotten odor sucked out, accompanied by the bursting sound of bubbles, as if something was corroding in the dark. The moment Zhou Daren heard that, his nose rose and he rushed into the room tightly. The sucking was already a mess. The thing turned into a bad feces and overflowed everywhere. A sticky liquid flowed out from the floor, and the smell seemed to stick to the skin. He stepped back in shock, and his feet rang back in the room, for a while, staring at the disaster in front of him wide-eyed. The door was suddenly pushed open, and the roommate came in, coughing and his face was distorted. "Zhou Daren. What kind of stinking thing is you, bastard? You're like this every time, making me vomit. If you don't clean up, I'll call the police today." The roommate's voice was sharp, dancing and swishing, and the rustling sound broke through the air. Zhou Daren slipped on the mucus, fell heavily, and made a thud. He got up in panic and let his hands calmly. "Don't be anxious, man, this is, well, a new perfume experience. Yes, it's the experiment. Just deal with it immediately, don't be surprised." His words were so angry that he couldn't hide the shock in his eyes. He compared his fingers in the air, trying to turn his attention. The roommates were not that easy to coax. They rushed harder, and with the sound of slamming, they started chasing in the small room. Zhou Daren hid, and the blurry news sounds were transmitted on the background of the TV, like a whisper in the distance, indicating a larger wave. The scene was absurd and his mind was changing rapidly, and his ambitions gradually disintegrated in the smell. Finally, everything froze in front of the TV screen. News reports flashed, the mysterious gold loss case is being reported, and experts suspect that it involves unknown forces. The blurry picture is projected on them, and the stinking smell is still spreading, like an unfinished curse. In the night, Zhou Daren's ambition began to fade, and the future was approaching quietly. Zhou Daren gasped and rushed out of the foul apartment, with the burden on his back as if it was an inappropriate one. After he glanced at him, his roommate's curse was still rumbling, mingling with the blurry whispers of the TV news. The street curled up in the shadows of the early morning, and the road lights cast swaying lights. He accelerated his pace and advanced along the narrow little corner towards the black market. My heart beat like a drum, and the things in the bag seemed to mock him for his recklessness, and every step made the ominous premonition deeper. As the alleys are all over, the black market is like a sleeping wilderness, hidden in the gaps on the high floor. The low-dealing trading low-pitched voices sprinkled from the dark corners, accompanied by the remote engines, like the low-pitched words of the city. Zhou Daren lowered his body and slipped into the entrance, looking over the faces around his hats, those figures wearing hats, with flashing eyes, as if everyone was thinking about something. He confirmed that no one was leaving, and turned into a damp corner, where the air was sticky and smelled of metal. He slowly opened his bags, and the gold bars inside flashed under the faint light, like an intimidating tribute. His fingers hit the golden bar, and a crisp sound of impact burst out, attracting the eyes of the surroundings. The buyers beat up, their eyes lit up like a wolf staring at a basketball. One of the men lowered their waists, picked up the gold bar, turned them over and checked, and murmurs overflowed from his mouth. It's good to have a good purity. Zhou Daren's heart was pounding. He imagined that money was coming like a tide. The gold bar in his hand was slightly hot, and a buzzing bird buzzed in his ears, like a warning murmur. "Hey, brother, this is real gold," Zhou Daren said in a low voice, and his words were filled with trembling. "One can make you retire. Don't hesitate and tighten your bid. I guarantee that it is definitely authentic." He sneered on the corner of his mouth, and tried to put on a confident smile, which could not cover up the slight movement of his fingertips. The buyer raised his head, his eyes full of suspicion. He turned the gold bar, tested its weight, and then said slowly, "I heard that there was a guy called Shurjin Master on the market." The thing looked like a golden light flash, but it turned into a stinky thing as soon as it turned. "Are you sure this wasn't a scheming?" His words pierced like a pinch, and Zhou Daren's chest tightened, and sweat beads slid from his magnitude. Zhou Daren was panicked and refused. "Say nonsense. I'm on the right stockings, from a reliable pipeline. Time is money. Don't waste my time." His voice slightly increased, and he was in a hurry, as if he was deceiving himself. The shouts in the background continued, and the black market small-scale buzzers intersected with sporadic clicks, creating a tight buzzing bird. At this moment, the metal bar begins to change shape. A disgusting melting sounded, as if metal was melting. Zhou Daren widened his eyes and saw it quickly transform into something sticky. The smell exploded, as if it was bursting from the underground, filling the entire corner. The buyers gasped and their faces twisted in an instant. They took a few steps back, and the sound of the curse came like a tide. "You mother is playing tricks on me? What a broken thing!" The buyer shouted angrily, dancing his arms, trying to catch Zhou Daren. "It's like a whirlpool and swallows nothing." The buyer's footsteps were rumbling in the narrow alleyway, as deafening as thunder. Zhou Daren turned around and ran away, and the sound of metal props colliding came from behind. He fell to the ground, slid over a beach of water, the water splashed up, and the moisture stuck to the skin. The Emperor stood up and knocked over the nearby shelf. The sound of shattering wood burst out and the goods scattered all over the ground. The alleyway seemed like an endless mystery. He rushed towards the exit, his chest undulating, and his breathing sounded in his ears. Far away, the sirens sounded approaching, and the sharp birds teared through the night sky, and the sound of the clamoring engine sounded like the roar of a dog. Zhou Daren glanced at the shadow of the patrol police, and his heart almost jumped out of his throat. He hid behind a trash can, his nose was smelly and mixed with sweat, making his thoughts chaotic. On the way to escape, he bumped into a passerby. A deep ramming sound burst out, and the man cursed and pushed him out. Zhou Daren hurriedly apologized, and smiled brightly in his words, "Oh, sorry, I'm going to go." But his eyes were flashing, and his inner warning was trembling. The sirens kept rumbling like an unfinished echo, reminding him that the crisis had not passed yet. The policeman's voice came from the front, stern and cold. "Is it you who just reported the black market rush? Don't run, we have to check the arrival of this pile of gold, it looks strange." Zhou Daren held his breath and shrank into the shadow, sweat dripping along his face. He murmured in a low voice, "I'm the one who's been by the way. Policeman, you're busy with yours, I'm going to go." As soon as the voice fell, he gritted his teeth and slipped away quietly as the lights swept away. In the night, Zhou Daren hid in a remote corner panting. The police lights far away swept across the street, and the flashes of red and blue intersecting flashes reflected on his damp face. He wiped the sweat from the magnitude, his eyes turning from panic to concealed flash. The ambition in my heart was not yet waxing, and it was covered with a layer of warning fog. He knew that he had to be more careful next time, otherwise the game would end forever. The street lights swayed slightly, leaving behind a quiet rest. Zhou Daren took a deep breath of night wind, his chest still had the previous panic, and his heartbeat gradually calmed down. He glanced at the police lights far away, and the red and blue flashes had become blurred spots, like the end of a malicious scene. The sparse pedestrians on the street hurried over in their coats. He rubbed the head and decided not to stop there. The neon signs of the bar flashed on the corner of the street, like an intimidating light tower. He opened his pace and his shoulders were slightly straightened, trying to regain the confidence of that layer of disguise. The bar door was opened, and a crisp sound of doors was circling with the low jazz rhythm. Zhou Daren stepped into this film with his shoulders shaking, like an actor who had been on the sand for a long time. He looked around and the guests at the bar were talking in a low voice, the crisp sound of the glasses colliding like the rhythm of the air. The foamy aroma of beer dissipates, mixed with a faint smell of smoke, making people unable to help but take a deep breath, as if this is another world, the shadow of the street. He walked straight to the bar, slapped the table and made a bang sound, leaving a wet mark on the wooden head. He took out a piece of golden flash from his pocket and Zhou Daren put it on the bar. The light shone down from above, reflecting a warm golden light, attracting the surrounding gaze. The guests next to them leaned out and their whispers came like waves. "Everyone is optimistic," he said softly, with a thrill of excitement in his verbal tuning. "This is my exclusive gold art. This piece of gold is worth a luxury house. Who wants to buy it? Don't miss this opportunity. I'm a real rich man." His hand knocked on the gold bar, and danced with exclamation, which attracted a sense of palmism and surprise. The jazz in the background suddenly became louder, and the sound of the copper tubes of the leopards seemed to be accompanying him. Zhou Daren sneered on the corner of his mouth, and tried to show a generous smile, glanced at the watch, and felt a stinging pain in his heart. The pressure of time was like a hidden rope, tightening his chest. He continued to show off, showing the gold bars to the guests in the neighboring town, his fingers flashing in the golden light. In the crowd, someone whistled, and another slapped the table, beer foam overflowing from the glass and hissing. But just at the top of this joy, a strange gurgle sound was sent out from the golden bar. Zhou Daren's face froze slightly, and he felt a warm breath rising from the object, and then, the disgusting odor spread like a tide. The metal bar begins to deform, the surface melts into a viscous texture, and the eyes turn into a dark piece. The air in the bar was becoming sticky, and Zhou Daren hurriedly reached out to hold it, his fingers touching the smooth touch. He tried to explain the picture, and his voice was trembling with panic. "Wait, this is, well, a new art. It was supposed to change like this, it was a high-level interactive work. Don't go, everyone!" But his words were not in the screams and coughs. Guests retreated, chairs scraped the floor and made a harsh noise, and beer fell on the table, splashing water. The jazz came to an abrupt end, replaced by the chaotic noise. The bartender shouted, "Get out! Let me go out!" The crowd's steps rushed towards the exit like a tide, and the echoes on the door slammed. Zhou Daren slipped to the ground with a hurry, and a bang hit the floor, causing a pain in his knee. He thrust up, avoiding the remains on the ground, and his heart was beating like a drum. At this moment, a figure emerged from the crowd. A ring was hanging around the man's neck, and a slight tingling sound came from the collision. He lowered his waist, picked up the artwork, sniffed it, and a spark of excitement appeared in his eyes. "Wow, this is such a priceless treasure," said the collector, with obsessive sensation in the voice. "It not only shines, but also has a unique atmosphere. I have collected dance bananas and sing stones. This is definitely my next treasure. Do you want to sell it to me? I offer you a double price." Zhou Daren was stunned, and a slight suspicion flashed through the sea of brain. He glanced at the collector and took out a glowing stone from his briefcase. The strange light of the stone jumped in the dim bar, flashing like a living thing. The two walked towards the corner, avoiding the wet marks on the ground, and their feet echoed the low words on the floor. Zhou Daren's eyes were flashing, and he tried to keep his voice calm. "Okay, if you really know how to appreciate it, then we will cooperate. But remember, this thing is not stable at any time, and I don't want to be sucked again." The collector's breathing became rapid. He held the piece of thing tightly, and the crocodile blew again. "It's so perfect. This fleeting miracle is what I pursue. Let's talk about it and cooperate. You, the Shurjin master, can help you avoid trouble." They sat in the corner, and the street flute sounded loudly outside the bar, like a remote alert. The collector pushed the briefcase in front of Zhou Daren, and the leather was rough and familiar. Zhou Daren agreed, and the two of them shook hands and made a clicking sound. His fingers were slightly swaying, and the ambition and doubts in his heart were like a line of confusion. He touched his pocket lightly, and the air inside reminded the risk, which also ignited new hope. The scene gradually became calm, and the bar was filled with hustle and bustle. When we walked out of the bar, it was already dark, and Zhou Daren and his collector were raising their figures under the street lights. The collector held his artwork tightly and walked lightly. A mysterious black car was docking quietly on the street, and the blurry figures in the car were watching them, and the shadows were like invisible nets, covering everything. Zhou Daren swallowed and felt a new force gathering in the air. He knew that this was just the beginning of another game. Zhou Daren glanced at the black car under the street lights, and the engine's roar was like a scattered wilderness. He exchanged a look with the collector, with adventure and intimate anxiety in his head. The collector stepped forward first and pulled the door open. The smell of leather inside the car came over his nose, accompanied by a silk scent of chenyan. Zhou Daren followed Diamond in, his body sank, and the seat spring squeaked slightly. The car door slammed, and the night wind was blocked from the outside, and the engine immediately roared, swallowing them not in the dark car. The black car drove away from the street quickly, and the sound of the car passing through the asphalt pavement continued like a low language. The blurred flashes of the street lights slid outside the window, reflecting Zhou Daren holding the golden piece of hand tightly. His fingers were slightly waving, and the rough surface reminded that this thing was his excrement, but now it has become their bet. He turned to look at the collector, and the cypress on the other party's neck swayed lightly under the faint light in the car, making a fine tingling sound. "When I go to the bank, I have a lot of trouble. Don't let me down," Zhou Daren said. His voice was low and he tried to cover up the tightness in his heart with jokes. The collector grinned and his shoulders slightly raised. "Brother, it's fun to take risks. If your golden technique really can get over it, we'll be in trouble." As the car turned, habituality pushed them to one side, and the engines twitched more and more in the night. They were silent for a moment, only hearing the friction of the wheels rolling over the road, and the winds that were about to face were spinning in the sea of their brains. The lights and fires in the city center are scattered, and the high-rise building outside the car window stands like a ghost, casting long shadows. Not long after, the black car parked at the door of the bank. The engine's low breath was left with only the remaining waves spiraling in the air. Zhou Daren took a deep breath, his chest undulated. He pushed open the car door and stepped onto the sidewalk with his hands in his arms. The door automatically slid open and hissed. He walked into the bank's hall, and the high heels and leather shoes on the floor knocked in his ears, like a rhythm that was about to explode. Under the soft light, the light illuminates the front row of the counter, who look down at the files and occasionally passes the rustling sound of the page. Zhou Daren's heart beat faster, and the gold block in his hand was heavy. He walked straight towards the cabinet, pretending to calmly clear his throat. The staff behind the counter raised their heads and their hair was flashing under the light. She glanced at what was in Zhou Daren's hand and her eyebrows were slightly furrowed. "Sir, please ask what you need to help." Her voice was filled with a policeman. Zhou Daren passed away the golden block, and his movements were as fast as if he was playing magic. "Hey, beauty, this piece of gold is my treasure, so I'll take it to the bank. I'm not here to cheat, I just want to make money and enjoy life quickly. Who knows it will cost such marijuana?" His words were so selfish, and he couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. When the staff received the metal block, the metal detector suddenly made a harsh sound, and the alarm planned to break the quiet of the building like a sting. Her eyes widened, her fingers froze in the air, and the golden flashes reflected on the screen, casting a jumping shadow. The surrounding guests turned over, and the private voices surged like a tide, and the noise of the chair scratching the floor increased. Zhou Daren pretended to be firm and his shoulders were filled with joy. "This is just a mistake, I guarantee it's real." But the staff's face changed, and she hurriedly checked the screen, and the sound was full of doubts. "Sir, this gold detector is crazy. Are you sure it's not a fake? Our system has never seen this. If it's a quasi-kill, I have to call the police. This will ruin my job." Her fingers hit the keyboard, her movements were rapid and her breathing became sluggish. A layer of tightness seemed to condense in the air. Zhou Daren's mind flashed through the sea of escape. He looked at the building and found a way out. At this moment, the consequences of the system's misjudgment exploded. The bank policeman made a big fuss, and the sound of the sharp sounds scattered across the four walls, causing a mess. People began to push, and the chairs were overturned and screamed in a chorus. The staff shouted, "Fake! False!" Her voice was drowned in the noise. Zhou Daren glanced at the golden block and shook slightly. The familiar omen made his heart beat like a war drum. He retreated spiritually, stepped into the crowd, and his shoulders were pushed away, bringing a chaotic touch. The golden cube turned back in the palm of his palm, making a puff sound, and a strong odor exploded like a flood. The air became sticky in an instant, and the guests covered their noses and screamed. There was a moist sound on the floor, and someone was drying sounded. Zhou Daren took the trouble to push the people around him and stabbed the back door. His steps knocked on the corridor with a rapid rhythm, and he couldn't help laughing while running. "Ha, that's always the case," he said to himself. "This ability is not only making money, but it's really fun to his mother, but I'm done when I get caught. I have to find a way to take advantage of this loophole and continue to get along." Outside, the sirens of the police car approached from a distance, like an ominous storm. The lights of the bank's large hall were uncertain. Zhou Daren passed through the back door and gasped into the alley. The chasing sound of the stomping behind the scenes, accompanied by the police's dialogue. "Is this strange thing again? The news that gold is shit will not be true. This world is too absurd. We have to investigate it clearly so that there will be no more slight consequences." A rough voice shouted. Zhou Daren hid behind the trash can, leaning against the cold wall. He touched the remaining gold block in his pocket, his eyes flashing with a slim shadow. Far away, the red-blue lights of the police car approached, and the night was like a thick curtain covering everything. He gasped quietly, and the chaos replayed in the sea of his brain, and the figure of the collector appeared. "Brother Daren, your golden technique is so crazy. We wanted to make money, but it turned out to be a mess. I don't want to be caught. You run away. I have to think about whether this is art or disaster." The collector's words were heard in his ears, like a remote echo. In the shadows of the alley, Zhou Daren's mouth slightly slapped, and a selfish sense of accomplishment arose. The blurred flash of street lights jumped on the water. He knew that this was just a continuation of the game, and he also felt that a bigger storm was coming. The night wind blew over and brought a slight silence. He took a deep breath and was ready to face the next challenge. Zhou Daren stood up from behind the trash can, his body tightly clasped on the cold wall. The blurred light of the street lights jumped on the water, reflecting the selfish smile on the corner of his mouth. Far away, the red-blue lights of the police car approached, like wild animals chasing the horse. He took a deep breath of the night wind, and suddenly rushed out of the alley with a biting heart. Both hands held the gold block in the pocket tightly, and felt the rough surface slightly warming at the fingertips. The rapid breathing sounded in the narrow space, accompanied by sporadic stomping of the feet in the distance. That was the sound of collectors and pursuers. His mind was too partial, these guys were definitely coming for this piece of gold. He turned toward the street, and the night was like a heavy curtain, swallowing his figure. As the streets hustle and bustle away, Zhou Daren turned into a dense side alley and unexpectedly entered a high-level auction venue. The metal door at the door was lightly raised, and he pushed the thick wooden door open, and was instantly covered by the lights inside. The lights in the room were shining like stars falling, covering strange collectors wearing masks. They talked in a low voice, and the scent of luxury perfume on their bodies formed an invisible network in the air. The auctioneer's voice was heard from the microphone, 1 million. 2 million. The sounds of the price came one after another, like a carefully organized conversation. Zhou Daren's heartbeat accelerated in his chest. He glanced at the golden block in his hand, and a slight sweat came out of his palm. The ticking sound was almost overwhelmed by the thrill of excitement around him. He took a deep breath, pretended to be a normal seller, and secretly put the gold on the face. The light on the tiles reflects the metal flashes, making it look more impressive. Zhou Daren leaned against the wall and observed the collectors around him. They shouted excitedly, and the crisp sound of gold coins colliding rose, like rain hitting the glass. Time passed by minute by second, a slight sensation surged in his heart, murmured in a low voice, "It's still 3 minutes. I can't fail." The gold block began to heat up slightly, and a low buzzing bird came from his palm, as if it was a sign of the disaster that was about to come. In the air, the luxurious perfume smell was gradually replaced by a strange breath, but he didn't think much about it, just clenched his fists hard and tried to calm himself down. Suddenly, a burst of explosive puff sound exploded, and the gold block turned backwards into a stinky stool on the ridge. The strong odor spread like a tide throughout the venue, instantly overwhelming the sound of perfume and the yelling of the price. Zhou Daren's eyes widened, and he pushed a collector around him, hitting his shoulder to the hardwood chair, making a stern sound. The war broke out, and the people screamed and scattered. The chairs fell to the ground, bringing a hustle and bustle. The air seemed to condense a sticky breath. He slapped his hand and slid over the table to find a way out. The collectors shouted one after another, "What kind of ghost thing is that?" Someone covered his nose and stumbled back. During the battle, Zhou Daren rushed towards the door and beat a rapid rhythm in the corridor. The shadow of the pursuer grew in the light, and he glanced at them approaching, and a feeling of isolation surged in his heart. The side door was right in front of him, and he pushed it open, accidentally knocking over a row of decorations. The brittle sound of the glass shattered is like a broken memory. He panted into the dark alleyway, and the night wind blew over, bringing a clear breath. The alleyway is as far as the head, and a patrol car stops at the corner of the street. The tired policeman leaned against the car, smoking, and the intermittent sound of the sirens echoed like a ghost. Zhou Daren tried to dress up stupidly and hid aside, but the policeman's eyes locked him, like a hunter staring at the basketball. "Hey, you stop there!" The policeman's voice was low, with exhausted power. He walked forward, and the light of the police flashlight swept past Zhou Daren's face, making his breathing more rapid. The sound of metal collision and the handshakes echoed in the air, like a sling. Zhou Daren was full of shoulders and said with a tight spirit, "Haha, police officer, what gold do you mean? That's just an art product that I ate from my poor stomach." Don't be so serious. Life is absurd. His mouth was snoring, and the panic in his eyes could not be hidden. The police squinted his eyes, his words full of suspicion. Boy, my investigation of the Golden trial cases has made my life worthless. You'd better explain it in a serious way, otherwise I'll let you feel the taste of the law. This time I'm not just playing around. At this moment, the collector's shouts were everywhere. Zhou Daren, you, Master Gene, your excrement is an unpriceful treasure. I will pay me twice the price. Don't let it turn back to the dead smelly thing, otherwise I will make you regret it. The collector's voice was crazy, as if it was leaking out of the darkness. Zhou Daren's heartbeat was like a drum. He glanced at the policeman, his fingers trembled slightly. The inner side deepened, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Hey, police officer, do you think I am a miracle maker? This world is already full of trouble. I am just an innocent victim. Don't force me, I have more surprise waiting for you." The policeman reached out to grab his arm, and Zhou Daren flashed back like a sea, and took advantage of the trouble to sneak into the shadow next to him. The siren sounded again and went away. He walked along the street, his figure melting into the night. Under the street lights, a suspicious black-robed man appeared in a flash, like a hidden ghost, laying seeds for the coming storm. Zhou Daren leaned against the wall and slowly breathed calmly. The feeling of selfish accomplishment in his heart appeared again. The night breeze was light, and he knew that this was just another round of the game, but he felt that a larger sneer was approaching quietly. Zhou Daren walked along the alley under the street lights, his chest undulating in the night wind was like an invisible sharp blade, striking his skin. The sirens from the distance gradually dissipated, leaving only the sound of rebirth wandering in the narrow space. He leaned against the cold wall, trying to calm his rapid breathing, and the selfish sense of accomplishment and anxiety in his heart were like a group of shadows. The glimmer of street lights swayed on the wet ground, reflecting the vigilance in his eyes, unable to disperse the darkness around him. Suddenly, a low sound came from the entrance of the alley, like an ancient call, shaking in the air. Zhou Daren turned instinctively, slid into the nearby shadow, and made a slight sound on the sticky ground. His heart beat faster, his fingers tightly clamped the remains in his pocket, which was still a strange heat. He held his breath and waited quietly. The night was like a thick curtain, wrapping everything around. In a while, several figures of black robe appeared under the street lights, and their robe rubbed out rustling murmurs, like snakes squirming in the grass. The head was a tall figure, the leader of the charlatan, wearing a flashing spell on his face, his eyes like a hot flame. Followers behind them followed, holding strange props, fake golden statues and slabs. Their steps knocked out the rhythm of the stone road, like a craziness about to explode. Zhou Daren was surrounded by them and had nowhere to escape. He felt a pressure coming from all directions, forcing him to straighten up. "Do you think you can hide?" The voice of the charlatan leader was like a murmur spelled from under his robe. He held the talisman in his hand, and the thing emitted a faint flash, illuminating the faces around him. Followers dragged Zhou Daren to the end of the alley, where there was a temporary sacrificial fortress that was absurdly stalked on the street. The balls were burning, the flames leaped, and the crackling sounded in the night sky. A warm breath filled the air. Zhou Daren's breathing became sluggish, and his mind quickly moved to find the gap to remove himself. On the fortress, the followers circled in a circle, and the props in their hands collided with sporadic sounds. They sang in a low voice, and the sound came like a tide. Zhou Daren was pressed in the center, and his knees were involuntarily chanting. He felt aware in his heart, unable to resist the powerful pull. "Don't think I don't know these crazy people. This golden technique is just a joke. I don't want to be your god." His words burst out, with a trembling shaking, and he couldn't hide his self-protection instinct. The charlatan leader smiled, and the sound was as sharp as metal rubbing. "You are the gods who are reincarnated. Your golden shit will uncover the secrets of the biological golden chain, and use your power to make us regain the ancient tradition." He approached Zhou Daren, and the light of the talisman reflected on the other party's face, casting a wild shadow. The chants of followers became brighter and brighter, and the drums came from somewhere, and the murmurs were like ghosts whirling around the ears. Zhou Daren's brain was sluggishly in his stomach, and he squatted down reluctantly and tried to delay time. Okay, I'll show you, but this thing will turn into stinky dog shit in 4 hours. Then don't cry and beg me. His temperament turned into self-righteousness, and the corners of his mouth slightly raised, unable to cover up the warning in his eyes. He took a deep breath and felt a familiar strangeness swelling inside his body. After a moment, a lump of gold slid from his hands, and when it landed, it made a crisp sound of metal hitting. The flashing light reflected the street lights, illuminating the shocking faces around them. The followers burst into deep shocks, and the air seemed to have condensed the energy of excitement. But that shihuang only lasted for a while. The gold began to reverse, and a pungent decayed breath quietly dissipated, like a hidden poisonous atmosphere storming. Zhou Daren's eyes lit up when he glanced at the leader's leader, and quickly turned into chaos. In the weird saying, the biological golden chain will destroy the mortal world. If you don't cooperate, we will let you stay calm in the pile of shit forever. The charlatan leader's words were full of threat, and he reached out to grab Zhou Daren. The chaos is like a tide. The followers fled in scatters, their screams and ramming sounds intertwined, and the props collapsed, making a stern collision sound. Zhou Daren pushed the leader open, and his shoulder hit the edge of the sacrificial fortress, and the fire flashed in an instant. He slipped on the slippery ground, the sound of curse emanated from his throat, and the sirens from the distance responded like a ghost. He got up, used the golden light to confuse the figure in front of him, and quickly rushed to the other end of the lane. Behind him, the leader's shouting was in the air, "The biological golden chain will be brought to death. You can't escape." The echo whipped Zhou Daren's back like a whip. He gasped and rushed into another lane, his footsteps rumbling in the narrow space. The night wind blows over, bringing a clear and refreshing feeling that cannot diminish the inner confusion. He stopped and leaned against the wall, his chest undulating, his eyes falling to the golden fragments in his hand. The thing began to corrode, making a faint cracking sound, like a bell in the heart. Zhou Daren's thoughts were like a whirlpool. Bio-golden chain? It sounds like a chaotic situation, but I don't believe it. I have to find a way to get rid of your white slut. He murmured, his voice swallowed by night. His fingers trembled slightly, and a flash of reflection appeared on his face, scattering the selfishness that never wore. As dark as the tunnel opened, he was as dark as the purity of the sky. He was caught in it step by step, knowing that this was just a prelude to the greater romance. Zhou Daren leaned against the cold wall in the alleyway, and the golden fragments in his hand were like a spark that was gradually extinguishing, casting a faint light. He took a deep breath, and the night wind penetrated from the narrow gap, bringing a biting slight swaying, making his shoulders bleak involuntarily. Those whispers that were constantly lingering in their ears, like an invisible net that tightly clamped his thoughts. He straightened his head, and the previous sporadic lines flashed in the sea of brains, those words about the golden chains of creatures, like shadows lurking in the darkness, urging him to move forward. His steps were gently knocking on the slippery concrete floor, accompanied by the blurry sound of the remote sirens. His heart was like a hidden drum, driving him to the unknown. Deep in the alleyway, a standing figure of a deserted warehouse appeared, like a forgotten giant, silent in the night. Zhou Daren glanced at the shadows around him, and after confirming that the dead end was unmanned, he quietly approached the beamed iron door. His fingers slid across the rough door, touching like a scar of time. He pried hard, and the door squeaked sharply, tearing the quietness around him, like a suppressed breath. He took out his cell phone, and the lights formed a fine line in the darkness, illuminating the mountains of files and test tubes. The pungent smell of chemical drugs was scattered in the air, and it penetrated into the nasal cavity like a ripe fruit rotting, making his eyebrows rise. He flipped the yellow papers, rubbing sounds spreading in the empty space, and each page revealed more secrets. Golden Alliance, this name is revealed from the document, like a nasty joke, hidden in the guise of controlling the gold market. His breathing turned rapidly, his fingers paused on the paper, and outlined a large spider net in his brain. Suddenly, a pain came from his abdomen, like a storm of undercurrent, forcing him to arch. He bit his teeth tightly and squatted against the corner of the wall, his squirming voice squirming in his body. The familiar change emerged again, and his palms were warm, and a piece of gold slipped from his fingers, glittering in the light when it landed, reflecting the shadows in the warehouse. He glanced at the flash of the monitor at the corner of the wall and smashed it away with force. The sound of the broken glass exploded like a firecracker, scattering in the air. But the light flew in an instant, and a stinking smell rose from the golden surface, like a hidden poisonous fog quietly dissipated. He lowered his curse and hurriedly stepped back, slid on the metal floor, bringing a humid and sticky touch. The warning bees in the warehouse suddenly rose, and the sharp beeheads roared like an angry wilderness. Zhou Daren's heart pounded violently. He turned around and rushed towards the exit, knocking over several shelves in the dark, and the deep echo of the collision of items followed like a wave. He recalled the weakness of his ability, the time limit for death, like an invisible shackle, always tightening at the critical moment. His inner strife was half self-protection instinct and half a concealed alert, forcing him to consider asking for help. The sound of the organization's steps approached from behind, trampling heavily on the metal floor, like the rhythm of a war drum, gradually approaching. He rushed out of the warehouse and entered the alleyway. He blew over at night, bringing a clear breath that failed to relieve his panting. Zhou Daren groped out and took out his cell phone, calling a familiar number, the phone number of policeman Xiao Ming. The sound spreads in the night sky like a thin and weak hope. He pressed a low voice, and there was a slight movement in his verbal tuning. "Brother Xiao Ming, I'm so crazy. Those guys from the Golden Alliance have caught up with me. I just found that they're treacherous and the evidence to control the gold market are in my hands. But I can't stand it anyone, you have to help." Xiao Ming's voice came from the phone, and a burst of exhausted doubts were scattered. "Zhou Daren, you are such a crazy person who dares to use your ability to change things. But if this is true, we have to join forces, otherwise the entire gold market will collapse. I don't want you to mess up this world alone." Xiao Ming's police engine rose immediately and approached from afar, like a waking beast. Zhou Daren stopped the phone and glanced at the figure of the chasing man who was storming out of the door of the warehouse. Their shouts were like a storm. "Catch that golden sergeant. He knows too much, don't let him escape, the leader will not let go of any threats." He gritted his teeth and speeded up his pace, and the turn of the lane became his way out. Soon, Xiao Ming's police car slid into the cable, and the lights broke through the darkness. They exchanged glances, and Xiao Ming pointed at the head. Zhou Daren rushed up and a garbage truck stopped far away. They diamonded into the car together, and the car closed with a slam, covering the noise outside. The garbage inside rubbed out a low voice, like a layer of impatient barrier. In the narrow garbage truck, the air is filled with rotten breath and the engine's temperature. Zhou Daren leaned against the car wall and tried to adjust his breathing, with a self-deprecating hype in his language. "What kind of ghost thing is this creature's golden chain? I originally wanted to swallow this treasure alone, but now I'm going to be chased and killed. The time limit for death always makes me busy and busy. I have to find someone to cooperate, otherwise I, a golden savage, will be really shit." His smile escaped lightly and scattered in the small space, unable to hide the fatigue in his eyes. Xiao Ming stared at him, his eyebrows were tightly locked, and his eyes were filled with determination. "Okay, Zhou Daren, we'll work together this time. You used your golden technique to draw them out, and I ended with my baton, but remember, I became stinky after 4 hours. Don't let me lose my eyes again." Zhou Daren's words turned out, and with self-deprecating, his fingers couldn't help but hold the remains in his hand. The thing began to shake slightly, and a buzzing sound came out of it, like a hidden police bell. At this moment, Zhou Daren's heart quietly changed. His original selfishness broke like thin ice, and the team's consciousness gradually emerged. He looked at Xiao Ming, and his eyes were a little more determined, so he didn't say much. Far away, the chasing chasers gradually approaching, like a storm about to explode. The trash car engine growled, and they knew that the dispute in the dark was imminent. Zhou Daren took a deep breath in the narrow space of the garbage truck by leaning against the damp car wall. the air in his chest was mixed with the rotten breath, which made his thoughts freeze. Outside, the shouts of the members of the Golden Alliance approached like a tide, and each sound pierced into the eardrum like a pointed point. He found a self-made toilet from his pocket, which was cold and rough, and was like an ominous object in his hand. His lips slightly slapped and he spoke a self-deprecating low voice, "I'm coming again, and my stomach is swaying again." Xiao Ming was beside him, his eyes fixedly pointing, and the two of them glanced over and over again. The tacit understanding in that moment was like a tangled fine line, which brought their plans together. They quietly pushed the car door, and a more intense and stinking face came, as if the ghost underground was in a low voice. The shadows in the alleys swallowed their figures and slid lightly over the moist ground, accompanied by the sound of flowing water from the sewer and the cry of the remote sirens. Zhou Daren squatted down, holding the toilet tightly with both hands, and a familiar heat flowed in his body. He concentrated on his mind. The golden art was ignited like a hidden fire, and a piece of feces turned into a palm, making a faint hiss sound, turning his eyes into a flash of gold. The light illuminated the dirty corners around it and attracted the gaze hidden in the darkness. He shouted loudly, "All these are side effects of experiments. The golden you are chasing will only turn into stinky shit in 4 hours." The sound was rumbling in the alleys, like a sudden storm. The members of the Golden Horse Alliance stormed out of the shadows, and their thrills were like waves exploding, mixed with the sound of the golden bar hitting the ground. In the air, the tight breath flowed like electric current. A member reached out to grab the gold bar, but was stunned at the moment of touching, with a greedy and crazy heat flashing on his face. Taking advantage of the chaos, Xiao Ming rushed forward and knocked the golden bar with a baton. The sound of bang bang is rumbling, and the sparks fly in the night, like an imminent fire show. He protected Zhou Daren to retreat, his shoulders slightly forward, his eyes swept around him, and he was alert to the potential threat. Far away, the sirens sounded even more sharply. The policemen in the previous cable appeared, and their car lights broke through the darkness and cast a shaking shadow. The scene's rush is like a rude madness, and the shouts and the collision of metals form a hustle and bustle. Zhou Daren was surrounded by the group of chasers, and his heartbeat was as rapid as a battle drum. He glanced at Xiao Ming's figure, and his determined gaze was like a lightning, illuminating the turn in his heart. He took a deep breath and extended the golden technique to the nearby trash pile. The golden light fell like rain, and the sound of shock roared in the alleys, and the golden fragments transformed into scattered and created a dazzling wonder. The members of the cult came out from the secret, and they murmured the mantra of God's descendants, and their voices were like a low buzzer, filled with the crazy and thrilling sacredness. This move successfully hindered their feet, and also exposed Zhou Daren's position. A member's hand almost grabbed the corner of his clothes. During the escape, Zhou Daren's heart was like a whirlpool. He glanced at Xiao Ming, and the familiar face reminded him of his previous selfishness and brought him a new courage. He took out a piece of gold that was about to expire from his pocket and threw it hard at the chaser. The odor like an explosion exploded in an instant, and the sound of poo-poo spreads with a strong smell, like a group of invisible smoke swallowing it away. The members retreated, coughed and spelled, and panic flashed across their faces. Zhou Daren pulled Xiao Ming and Diamond into the nearby sewer entrance. The narrow passage swallowed them away, the damp air wrapped around the breath of the soil, and the sound of the footsteps blew across the stone wall. They leaned against the wall and gasped, and Zhou Daren's abdomen felt ache, like a hidden wild beast growling. He smiled strongly and said lightly, "Xiao Ming, I originally wanted to make money with this shit of money, and now I have to reveal the absurd truth. But if you cover me, we may be able to deal with these crazy things." Xiao Ming held the baton tightly, knocked on the water pipe and made a knock echo, and said with a calm voice, "Brother Zhou, this time it's not for money, but to prevent those guys from continuing to control the world. I'll use this baton to finish it, and you'll focus on using your golden technique to create chaos. Let's end this joke together." Outside, the chasing killer's footsteps were approaching, like a storm about to explode. The members of the Jinxing Alliance shouted, "Catch him. That gold is our God-giving grace. Don't let him escape, otherwise our golden empire will be over." The police voice came from afar, carrying exhausted doubts. It's you again, Zhou Daren? Every time you make such an ignorant move, are you a genius or a vain? Tell me quickly the truth of this golden chain, or I have to arrest you. Zhou Daren held the gold bar in his hand. It began to change color, and a smoke appeared, which almost stinky smelled. His fingers trembled slightly, and a feeling of uncertainty arose in his heart. He raised his head and looked at Xiao Ming, with a little more determination in his eyes, and he didn't say much. The water flow in the dark continues to whisper, and the clash that predicts a more climax is approaching quietly. Zhou Daren leaned against the cold stone wall of the sewer, his chest was undulating, and the golden bars in his hand had begun to emit a strange green light, like a living thing corruption. Xiao Ming's breath turned into white fog in the darkness. He held the baton tightly and his eyes closed. The sound of his feet from the entrance. The sound was approaching like a tide, and every step hit the moist soil on the ground, making it impossible for people to suddenly see the conflict that was about to explode. He took a deep breath, and the damp air wrapped in a rotten breath, shaking his nose. Zhou Daren's eyes instantly condensed, and his determination was like an undercurrent. He turned to Xiao Ming and said in a low voice, "You can't hide anymore, we have to rush out." As soon as the voice fell, he pushed open the iron column beside him and led his head into the narrow passage. The sound of footsteps reverberated into layers on the stone wall, accompanied by the constant ticking of water drops, like the low words of time are quietly passing by. They ran along the curved pipes, the ground was slipping like a layer of oil film. Zhou Daren almost slipped, and the gold bar in his hand vibrated faintly, like a snail moving slightly. The sound and the smell of rotten smell made Xiao Ming speed up. With his shoulders in front of him, the baton slapped in front of him, slapped at the shadows around him. "Brother Daren, be careful!" Xiao Ming shouted, and the sound extended into an extended resonance in the narrow space. Suddenly, a beamed iron door appeared in front of them. They pushed it hard and entered the central room of an underground secret base. The lights were flashing and flickering like breathing, and a middle-aged man wearing a gold mask stood beside the core device. The device emitted a low mechanical whisper, as if a living creature was roaring lightly. The leader turned around and his eyes flashed like a cold light. Zhou Daren didn't even think too much, so he threw out the golden bar in his hand. The golden bar plotted an arc in the air, and burst out with a jingle sound when it landed. The energy of the golden technique spreads like a wave. Zhou Daren felt the heat flow in his body. He shouted, "I thought this golden technique was just a tool for financial development. As a result, it allowed me to see the absurdity of this world. I would rather sacrifice myself and destroy your bullshit." Before he finished speaking, his subordinates came from all directions, and the room was filled with chaotic footsteps and whirring fist style. The leader summoned his subordinates and laughed wildly in the air. "Do you think your gold is a miracle? It's just a test of our biochain. If I kill you, I can control all the secrets of gold and let society fall into the vortex of greed forever." He whipped Zhou Daren's eardrum like a whip. Xiao Ming rushed forward, the police baton danced, and stopped an attack from a subordinate. The deep collision sound was shaking, accompanied by a low bird, which made the air shake. Zhou Daren moved the machine and took out another piece of gold from his pocket and injected the golden technique into it. The golden flash, like a sudden flash, transformed the floor into a slippery trap. The enemy walked in a row, someone slipped and screamed and formed a messy exchange with the metal-slammed lens. The leader stumbled for a moment, and the golden mask on his face slightly shifted, showing a twisted smile. Taking advantage of this empty file, Zhou Daren swung to the core device. As soon as his finger touched the cold metal, the device glowed instantly, and the golden light illuminated the entire room. However, a familiar premonition came like a tide, and the golden slug began to change color, accompanied by a puff sound. A strong smell exploded. The enemy kept covering their noses and retreating, and the cough spread in the air. "Brother Daren, you are not an unemployed gambler, you are a hero. Let's end all this together, don't let these crazy people continue to control the world." Xiao Ming shouted, and the baton was knocked out again, squeezing the leader's weapon. The man grabbed Zhou Daren's clothes and pressed him next to the device. Zhou Daren was slammed and the footsteps of his brain flashed past the darkness of the garbage truck, the golden confusion, and Xiao Ming's fixed gaze. His heartbeat was as fast as a war drum, accompanied by the gurgling sound of the sewer water. Go to your sneer, I will let this shit go back to its original form, and don't let you continue to destroy everyone's dreams. Zhou Daren used his last force and punched the device. The huge sound of the roar exploded, and the debris scattered like rain, and the scorching waves twisted the air. The leader roared and cried, but was swallowed by smoke. The battle gradually subsided. Zhou Daren fell to the ground, and his chest felt like a fire burning. Xiao Ming pulled him up and dragged him out. The leader's roar echoed from behind, mingling with the siren's sound of the nearsharp. They stumbled out of the sewer, and the lights on the street greeted indifferently. Zhou Daren lay on the cold asphalt road, gasping for breath, and the explosion of smoke rose. Far away, the crowd was still chasing something, and the golden phantom was flashing in the lights, just like a never-ending whirlpool. Zhou Daren fell to the ground, his chest burning like a fire tongue licked, and the cold asphalt road reflected the faint light of the street lights. He gasped, stretched out his hand to grab in his pocket, and the familiar golden light had disappeared, leaving only a sticky mud slid down his fingers. Far away, the leader's roar was like the roar of a wild beast, scattering the sharp sirens, tearing the night sky. He stood up and patted the dust off his body, swaying his shoulders slightly, signaling Xiao Ming to follow. Under the street lights, the reflections in the puddles swayed blurrily, like a dream that was about to disperse. They hurried along the street, and the red light of neon lights jumped on the road after the rain, reflecting the spotted shadows. Zhou Daren suddenly stopped and a familiar gurgle sound rose from his belly, without the miracle of bringing golden light as usual. He was stunned for a moment, and then burst into laughter, the sound blending into the noise of the carriage noise and the gurgling sound of the sewer. The smile was filled with the pain of being relieved. He patted Xiao Ming on the shoulder. "Ha, my devotional spirit finally retired. I thought gold could change the world, but it only made everyone even more absurd. From now on, I will be an ordinary person and no longer pursue those illusory wealth bubbles." Xiao Ming stood there in a warm complexion in his eyes. He held Zhou Daren's hand and his words were always gentle. "Brother, you always act smart, but this time you let me see true courage. In the future, we will spend ordinary days together, and don't let those crazy people chase us." They continued to walk forward, the night wind gently brushed over their faces, bringing a sense of turmoil, and the shouts of the small frogs on the corner of the street were like a continuous rhythm, dissipating in the mist. After a sudden change of movement, Zhou Daren pulled Xiao Ming into a nearby old bar. The ginger at the door slams up crisply, and the jazz in it immediately burst out, like an instant wave. In the bar, the lights were flashing, and the noise of the crowd was intertwined with the hissing of beer foam. Zhou Daren looked around and his eyes lit up. He began to shout and greet the former enemy, collectors, policemen, and even the charlatan leader. Soon, the scene became chaotic, and the crisp sound of the wine glasses colliding began to sound, and someone pushed into the door, bringing a pungent smell of alcohol. The party kicked off next to the bar, and Zhou Daren climbed up the high ground and shouted, "Everyone is here to wish me goodbye. From gods to mortals, this is the end of life." In the background, the melody of jazz rose slowly, accompanied by the bursting sound of the ball of air and the screams of the crowd. He performed a self-deprecating magic show, pretending to pull out gold from his cuffs, and only a piece of fried stinky tofu was transformed. When the tofu landed, the smell of the air spread out, causing the audience to burst into laughter. Zhou Daren's mouth slightly slapped, and a self-deprecating light was in his eyes. He snatched his hand. "Look, this is my golden feces, but now, it's just a bunch of ordinary things." The collector rushed forward excitedly, staring at Zhou Daren with bright eyes. "Zhou Daren, your golden stool is art. Even if it turns into shit, I have to collect it, don't try to escape." He reached out to grab the prop, slipped on the floor, and made a loud bang. In the midst of chaos, the police raised their eyebrows and pulled out the gun. The gun was clicking. "It's you again?" "It's a mess every time, but this time it seems that you've really changed. I'll let you go, but next time it won't be so good." A chase game broke out in the crowd, and the sound of the chairs overturned and the funny whistle sounded one after another, and the atmosphere was like a crazy out of control. In the corner, Zhou Daren and Xiao Ming found Zhang Xiaoyao to sit down. Outside the window, the night wind blew up and down the rise and fall leaves, igniting the hustle and bustle of the street. They talked in a hurry. Zhou Daren's eyes gradually softened, and his language was filled with exhausted peace. "Xiao Ming, I once thought gold could make me turn over, but it only fell into the guise of the biological chain." He took out a Navy document from his pocket, and rustled papers, which recorded those dark secrets. "Now, I want to go back to ordinary things and no longer be scattered by those phantoms." Xiao Ming pointed his head and shook his hand tightly. "Let's face it together, brother." When the party reached orgasm, Zhou Daren put on his wine glass and stood up. His voice penetrated through the noise. "Look at this absurd world, we chased gold and forgot the real value. From now on, I smashed all of this and returned to reality." He smashed a gold model to the ground, and when the debris landed, it emitted a metal jingle sound, storming in the air. At that moment, laughter and palm sound came like a tide, and the charlatan leader knelt down wildly. "God, you are our rescue. Even if your ability disappears, your legend will be eternal to remind the world of money." Zhou Daren just smiled, and his eyes flashed with a flash of distraction. When the party gradually calmed down, Zhou Daren walked into the crowd on the street. His back gradually blurred, and a mysterious gurgle sound came from afar, like an unfinished heart wandering in the night. The street lights faded away, leaving behind a golden phantom, as if the thorns of society never ended.